I helped raise my sister's baby until she started treating me like the second parent. I, 27F, am currently sitting in my apartment in complete, deafening silence, and for the first time in 18 months, I don't feel like I'm waiting for a bomb to go off. But if I check my phone, I have 14 missed calls from my mother and a string of texts from my younger sister, 22F. That would make you think I'd committed a felony. To give you the full picture, my sister had a baby boy about a year ago. The lead up to his birth was a disaster. The father was someone she'd been seeing for a few months. As soon as the stick turned blue, he vanished. Not just we broke up, vanished. He blocked her on everything, changed his number, moved out of his apartment, and told mutual friends that if she tried to sue for child support, he'd claim the baby wasn't even his. It was ugly. She was 21, terrified, and alone. When she was 6 months pregnant and spiraling, I stepped up. I took her to every ultrasound. I saw that little flickering heartbeat on the screen before she did, because she was too busy crying to look. I was the one who built the crib. I was the one who researched which car seats were the safest. I did it because she's my baby sister, and that's what you do. When the day finally came, I was in the delivery room. I held her hand while she screamed. I slept in that plastic, upright hospital chair for 2 nights because she didn't want to be alone with the nurses. When my nephew was finally placed in my arms, I felt this overwhelming, fierce protective streak. I love that little boy. I really love him. He has these tiny curls and the most infectious laugh, and I would do anything for him. And looking back, I think that love was the hook. The first few months were a blur of crisis management. My sister was hit exceptionally hard by postpartum depression. It wasn't just baby blues. She was drowning. She'd call me at 2 a.m., sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, saying the baby wouldn't stop screaming, and she felt like a failure. I'm a soft touch. I'd get out of my warm bed, drive 20 minutes across town half asleep, and walk through her front door to find the house in shambles and her sitting on the floor. I'd take the baby, send her to bed, and stay up until sunrise rocking him. I brought groceries because I realized she was living on coffee and toast. I used my own money to buy the high-end formula when the cheap stuff gave him colic. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself, she's a single mom, she's young, she just needs to get her feet under her. But somewhere along the line, the dynamic shifted. It stopped being, I'm in a crisis, can you help? And turned into, I'm bored/tired. You're on duty. I work a demanding corporate job. I'm doing 50-hour weeks, trying to build a career. About 4 months ago, I had just walked through my door after a 10-hour shift. I was exhausted, my feet ached, and I was looking forward to a bowl of cereal and a quiet show. My phone buzzed. On my way. He's fussy, and I need a break. I hadn't agreed to anything. I hadn't even replied. 3 minutes later, there was a frantic knock at the door. I opened it, and she literally thrust the diaper bag into my chest. She kissed the baby on the forehead, muttered, "You're a lifesaver," and was back in her car before I could even get a word out. I stood in my foyer, still in my blazer and slacks, holding a crying 6-month-old. I didn't even have milk in the fridge for myself. I spent that night bouncing him on my shoulder while I ate cold takeout at midnight, staring at the wall. I remember this distinct feeling of resentment bubbling up, a cold, hard knot in my chest. I realized I hadn't seen a movie, gone on a date, or had a full night's sleep in weeks. I didn't choose to have a baby. I chose a career, an apartment with white rugs, and a quiet life. But I was living the life of a co-parent without any of the say-so. Whenever I tried to bring it up to my mom, she'd shut me down instantly. She's young, Mom would say, usually while she was folding the baby's laundry that I had washed. You're her big sister. Family shows up. You have a stable job and a big apartment. The least you can do is give her some breathing room. You don't know how hard she has it. I started missing out on my own life. I canceled a weekend trip with friends because my sister just couldn't handle him that Saturday. I used my PTO, vacation time I'd earned, to watch my nephew because the daycare had a COVID scare and my sister couldn't risk her new job. My manager actually pulled me into his office and asked if everything was stable at home because I looked like a ghost and was constantly distracted by frantic texts. Financially, it was a drain, too. I've paid for doctor copays, bought more boxes of diapers than I can count, and even paid her electric bill once, because she was short. She always says, "I'll Venmo you when I get paid." She never does. The mental health weekend was the final straw. Last week, she called me, sounding perfectly fine, almost chipper. "Hey, I was thinking about headed out of town this weekend, maybe Friday to Sunday. I just really need a mental health break, you know?" A little reset. Can you take him? I looked at my calendar. I had finally booked a massage and planned to spend the weekend reading and catching up on sleep. I felt that familiar guilt rising, but then I thought about my bank account, my exhaustion, and the fact that she hadn't asked me how I was doing in 6 months. No, I said. I can't. There was this long, heavy silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end. What do you mean you can't? She asked, her voice dropping that chipper tone. I mean I have plans. I'm exhausted, and I need my own weekend. Wow, she scoffed. So, I guess I know who I can't rely on. It's funny how you talk about how much you love him, but the second I actually need help, you bail. I'm a single mom. My name. I don't get weekends. I don't get to just turn it off. Something in me just snapped. The knot in my chest broke. I do love him, I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected. But I am not his second parent. I am his aunt. You chose to have this baby. You chose to keep him. I did not. I've spent the last year being your on-call nanny, your ATM, and your emotional punching bag. I am done being a parent to a child I didn't conceive. She started sobbing, that loud, hysterical crying she uses when she wants mom to intervene. She told me I was abandoning her, that I was cruel, and that I didn't understand this struggle. She hung up on me. Within 10 minutes, my mom called. She didn't even say hello. How could you say that to her? She's in the bathroom crying her eyes out. You know she's fragile. You told her baby isn't your responsibility? That's your flesh and blood. He is my flesh and blood, I told my mom. But he is her responsibility. Why aren't you taking him for the weekend if it's so vital that she has a break? I'm old. My back can't handle a toddler. Mom snapped. You're young and capable. One day you'll need help, too, and you'll remember how you turned your back on your sister. Since then, it's been radio silence from my sister, except for one Venmo request she sent me for diapers, which I declined. My mom is barely talking to me, giving me the cold shoulder at Sunday dinner. Here is the part that makes me feel like a monster. When I imagine stepping back completely, not answering the 2 a.m. calls, not having a diaper bag permanently in my hallway, I feel an overwhelming sense of relief. I feel like I can breathe again. But then I see a picture of my nephew, or I think about him sitting in a messy house with a mom who is too overwhelmed to play with him, and I feel physically sick. He's just a baby. He didn't ask for a deadbeat dad or a mom who wasn't ready. He didn't ask to be a burden to his aunt. I'm terrified that by setting this boundary, I'm punishing a child for his mother's choices. I'm worried that if I'm not there to be the stable one, he won't have anyone. But I also feel like if I don't stop this now, I'll be 35, still single, and still raising a child that isn't mine while my sister lives her life. My sister texted me this morning. He's been asking for you all morning. I guess he'll just have to get used to you not being around. It felt like a knife to the gut. It was pure manipulation, and I know it, but it worked. I've been crying on and off all day. Am I the a-hole? Am I being cruel and selfish, like they say? Or am I just reclaiming a life I never should have lost in the first place? Update. The first few days after I said no were strangely calm. No late-night calls. No frantic messages about teething or fevers or daycare issues. I went to work, came home, cooked an actual dinner instead of eating whatever required the least effort, and sat on my couch without bracing for my phone to light up. I slept through the night twice in a row, which honestly hadn't happened in over a year. I didn't realize how used I'd become to living in a constant state of alert until it stopped. Relief showed up before guilt did, and that realization alone made me feel awful. I kept expecting some dramatic confrontation, but instead my sister went quiet. Not the temporary kind of quiet where someone cools off and comes back ready to talk. This felt deliberate. She stopped opening my messages. Family group chats continued without me being acknowledged directly. My mom would send photos of my nephew in the chat with captions about how fast he was growing, but if I reacted or asked how he was doing, the conversation moved on like I hadn't spoken. It felt childish, but it also worked. I started second-guessing everything. About a week in, my mom invited me to dinner like normal. I almost didn't go because I knew it would be uncomfortable, but part of me hoped things had cooled down enough for a real conversation. The second I walked in, I could tell nothing had changed. My sister wasn't there, which wasn't unusual, but my mom barely made eye contact. The entire evening felt stiff. She talked about neighbors, groceries, television shows, anything except the situation sitting between us. Eventually, I asked how my nephew was doing. She answered shortly, said he was fine, then added that my sister was learning who actually supports her. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just quiet enough to sting more. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I finished dinner and went home feeling like I'd somehow failed a test I didn't know I was taking. A few days later, my sister finally broke the silence, but not in the way I expected. She didn't apologize or try to talk things out. She sent a long text about how hard motherhood was and how alone she felt, how every day was exhausting and overwhelming. Reading it, I could almost hear the version of her from those early postpartum months, the scared one who genuinely needed help. For a moment, I felt myself slipping back into old habits, ready to offer to come over, ready to fix things. Then the tone shifted near the end. She wrote that she hoped I was enjoying my free time while she struggled, and that she never imagined her own sister would abandon her when things got tough. That word again. Abandon. I didn't respond immediately. I sat with it for hours because I realized something uncomfortable. The conversation wasn't actually about solving anything. It was about pulling me back into the role I'd stepped out of. When I finally replied, I kept it simple. I told her I loved her, and I loved my nephew, but I needed boundaries. I said I wasn't disappearing from their lives, just stepping back from being an on-call parent. I offered specific things I could realistically do: plan visits, scheduled babysitting occasionally, helping her research childcare resources, but I made it clear that surprise drop-offs and financial support couldn't continue. She read it. No reply. The next development came from somewhere I didn't expect: my job. My manager asked if we could talk after a meeting, and I immediately assumed I was in trouble. Instead, he told me he'd noticed a huge change in my focus and energy over the past 2 weeks. He said I seemed more present, less stressed, and asked if things at home had improved. I almost laughed because I hadn't realized how visible my burnout had been. I'd convinced myself I was holding everything together, but apparently everyone around me could see I was barely functioning. That conversation hit harder than I expected. It forced me to confront how much of myself I'd slowly given away. Not all at once, not dramatically, just piece by piece until exhaustion became normal. Around that same time, one of my friends, someone I'd canceled plans on more times than I can count, invited me out again. I almost said no out of habit. Then I caught myself. I went. We had dinner, talked about completely ordinary things, and halfway through the night, I realized I hadn't checked my phone once. No anxiety, no anticipation of crisis. It felt unfamiliar, like rediscovering a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. That's when the guilt came back full force. Because enjoying my own life suddenly felt like proof that my family was right about me being selfish. A few days later, my sister sent another message. This one was shorter, sharper. She said daycare costs were overwhelming and asked if I could at least help financially since I wasn't helping physically anymore. Seeing it written that way made something click for me. The expectation hadn't actually changed. Only the form of help she wanted had. I said no again. Politely but clearly. She didn't respond, but my mom called within the hour. The conversation escalated quickly. She told me families sacrifice for each other, that I was keeping score instead of acting with love. Asked why the responsibility always seemed to land on me and never on anyone else. That question didn't go over well. She brought up everything I'd done before as evidence that I was capable, which felt backward somehow. The more dependable I'd been, the more obligated I was expected to remain. For the first time, I told her I was burned out. Not tired, not busy. Burned out in a way that had started affecting my health and my work. I said helping occasionally was one thing, but being treated like a default parent wasn't sustainable. There was a long pause on the phone. Not angry, just quiet. Then she said she didn't realize I felt that overwhelmed. I don't know if she truly didn't see it, or if she just hadn't wanted to. Things didn't magically improve after that, but the tone shifted slightly. Less accusation, more distance. The hardest moment came last weekend. My sister showed up at my apartment unexpectedly. Not with the baby alone. She looked exhausted in a way I hadn't seen since those early months. We sat at my kitchen table for a long time without really knowing how to start. She admitted she was angry because she felt like I'd changed the rules without warning. From her perspective, I'd always said yes, always shown up, and then suddenly refused when she needed consistency the most. Hearing it framed that way made me understand why she felt blindsided, even if I still believed the boundary was necessary. I explained something I hadn't fully articulated before. I never agreed to a permanent arrangement. I helped because she was struggling, assuming it was temporary. Over time, temporary turned into expected, and I didn't speak up soon enough. By the time I did, resentment had already built up. The conversation wasn't dramatic. No yelling, just uncomfortable honesty. She cried at one point, not the loud, theatrical crying from before, just quiet tears. She admitted she was terrified all the time, that she felt trapped, watching her friends move forward while her entire life revolved around survival. Hearing that softened something in me, because underneath everything, she's still my little sister who got thrown into adulthood overnight. But empathy didn't erase reality. I told her I couldn't go back to how things were. I said I wanted to be part of my nephew's life as his aunt, not as a replacement parent. I offered again to help her look into childcare assistance programs and parenting support groups, things that didn't rely solely on me. She didn't agree right away. She didn't apologize either. But she listened. Before leaving, she asked if I wanted to see him the next day, not because she needed a break, just to visit. That distinction mattered more than I expected. Seeing my nephew again after weeks apart nearly broke me. He reached for me immediately, babbling in that excited way toddlers do when they recognize someone familiar. For a moment, all the doubt rushed back. I wondered if stepping back had hurt him, if he'd felt abandoned even though he couldn't understand why I'd been gone. But the visit felt different. I wasn't exhausted. I wasn't counting hours or worrying about work the next morning. I got to just play with him, read him a book, laugh when he tried to feed me crackers he'd already chewed. When I left, I hugged him goodbye instead of bracing for another overnight shift. Driving home, I realized something important. Distance hadn't reduced my love for him. It had removed the resentment that was quietly growing underneath it. Things still aren't perfect. My mom remains distant sometimes, and my sister and I are rebuilding trust slowly, awkwardly. There are moments when guilt creeps in, especially when I know she's having a hard day. But I'm starting to understand that boundaries don't equal abandonment. They're just limits that keep relationships from collapsing entirely. The biggest change is internal. I no longer feel like my life is slipping away without my consent. I'm making plans again, sleeping normally, thinking about my future without automatically factoring in someone else's parenting schedule. And oddly enough, I feel more capable of being present for my nephew now that I'm not overwhelmed by responsibility that was never mine to carry alone. I don't know what our long-term dynamic will look like yet. We're still figuring that out in real time. But for the first time since he was born, helping feels like a choice again instead of an obligation. That difference has changed everything.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update for more such stories.